Welcome everybody, it's Debbie O'Neill of Scrap Me Quick Designs, and I'm going to show you today a fun project that I love to do, and it's great for helping me in my own kitchen as well as a great gift for people. So we're going to be talking about using etching cream today, and how can you customize the bottom of your Pyrex glass dishes, baking pans like this. This one says from the O'Neill kitchen, and you can certainly, do whatever you want as far as the words go that you're going to etch, but we're going to be etching it on the bottom of the pan. So I'm going to show you how to make a stencil in Design Space. We're going to talk about the different types of etching cream. I've even done a test, because one of the biggest discrepancies when you start looking at how long do you leave the etching cream on, everybody has a different opinion about it. So I did my own test to share with you using the two etching cream products I'm going to talk about. I did a 3-minute test, 5, 10, 15, and 20-minute test to see if there was a big difference between how long you leave it on or not. So I'm going to share that information with you as well. Now, there's some supplies you're going to need, so I'm going to go ahead and go over those. We're going to talk a little bit about the different pans and why some of them etch and some of them don't. So let's get started. So of course, the first thing you're going to need is your baking dish. So a Pyrex baking dish. This one is probably a 9 by 12. I'm going to today I'm going to be etching one that is, I think it's 15 by 10. And the difference between the glass, you may hear, if you look it online, you may hear that some people say that their Pyrex dish, they couldn't etch it. That's because Pyrex had two different manufacturing processes. They had one where the heat process for making the glass in the shape was harden the glass without any coating on it. Those Pyrex dishes you can etch like a dream, quickly, easily, no problem with that. They also had another manufacturing process where they tried putting a plastic coating around the outside of the glass to prevent it from shattering. Those are the ones that if you have a problem etching, it means that your glass is probably coated. You cannot see it with the naked eye, so it's really hard for you to tell if it will work or not. And I'm going to give you a tip on how to get around that so you can test before you do all this work. All right, so you'll need your glass baking dish, all right, and then you will also need your etching cream. So I've got two different brands here that I have tested, that I use, that I'm going to talk about. The first one is Etched. This one can be purchased online. I'll link all the tools and stuff that I use in the description of the video so you know what to get and where you might be able to get it. Anyway, so Etched is a etching cream that is reusable. It works on glass and mirrors, which I thought was really cool, and it permanently etches. It's just a little bit different product. It's not as caustic as the Armor Etch. I don't think it smells as much as the Armor Etch does when you open it, but it has some other properties to it, and I'll talk about those here in a minute. And then I'm going to be using Armor Etch. Okay, so Armor Etch is the one you can get at most of the craft stores. It has a very strong odor. Both of these products you need to use in a well-ventilated area, so don't use it in a tight little space. Make sure that you have some protective gear. You will see me today wearing an apron. I never wear an apron unless I'm doing some super messy craft like painting or using etching cream. So you want to have an apron on. You also want to have some gloves. So these are just disposable gloves because this etching cream is caustic to your skin, because what it does on the glass is it actually is eating away the surface of the glass. So think about that. You don't want that on your skin. So you want to protect your skin. And I just picked these up. These are from Michael's. They're over in the paint section. It's I don't know, 14 pairs of disposable gloves, very inexpensive. And I use these when I'm doing messy crafts like this, or I need to protect my skin. So you want a pair of gloves. You're also going to need some tools. So the tools that we're going to be using, paper plate, so that you can have a surface to put your tools on as you're using it. Other debate that you're going to hear people say is, can you use a foam brush or do you need a bristle brush? Guess what? It doesn't matter. You can use either one. People who tell you you can't use a foam brush, I don't know why they're saying that, because I've used a foam brush for years every time I've used etching cream. Never a problem. So you can use a foam brush or you can use a bristle brush. A little bristle brush is nice if you're working with small delicate areas. You can really get your etching cream in there easily with a small bristle brush. So I've got both of those here. And then some type of a little squeegee is nice to kind of help move the etching cream across your stencil. Of course, you will need your material to make your stencil with. So I highly recommend you use a removable vinyl. So this is just a piece of Cricut removable vinyl that I'm going to make my stencil out of, and I will show you how to do that in Design Space. It's so easy. We're going to use the slice feature. I'm going to show you some things to do with your fonts so that you can get everything spaced out. We're going to add some images, and I'm going to show you how simple it is to make your own stencil. So I recommend the removable Cricut vinyl because it's easier to get off the glass later. Now, I know that I've seen other people say, oh, it's got to be permanent vinyl, whatever. No, it doesn't need to be permanent. In fact, it's really hard to get the permanent vinyl off after you finish the etching part. So you want to make sure a removable vinyl is great. You can try using a contact paper. The contact paper was a little bit tougher because it's thinner, and I had some problems with it tearing around smaller intricate areas. So the vinyl works really good, and that's what I recommend. So you'll need a sheet of vinyl, and then also you need some transfer tape. I'm just going to be using Cricut transfer tape. And then, of course, to do the vinyl, we're going to need a weeding tool, your scraper, and a pair of scissors to trim around your image. And you will need some masking tape to help protect your glass surface as we put our stencil on. You'll want to have that. We'll need to clean our glass before we apply our vinyl. So I'm using a lint cloth and some just regular rubbing alcohol. That is the best to use. And of course, I'm messy, so I always have paper towels handy. And you'll need some type of a measuring tape or measuring ruler. Now, one question I get asked all the time is, can I use stencil vinyl when I use etching cream? Stencil vinyl really is best used for like on wood and canvas. It's really thick. It's easier to apply it to those types of surfaces. It doesn't stick really well on the glass. So I do not recommend using the stencil vinyl on the glass. That's just a personal preference of mine. I really feel like the removable vinyl does the best job for you. I have a craft mat on my table that protects my table at all times. But when I'm doing crafts like this, I also use a special craft mat. Then we're going to talk about how do you measure your glass project so that then you can make the stencil in Design Space. So I'll be right back to talk to you about that. Okay, so I wanted to show you up closer what we're trying to accomplish with this project. So this is a glass baking pan, and you can see here it says from the O'Neill kitchen. So we're going to etch something, but it's not going to be on the inside of the glass. We're going to be flipping our glass over, and we're going to be doing our etching on the bottom of the glass, okay? So as you can see, it needs to be in a mirrored image. So when we create our stencil here in a few minutes, we're going to mirror it before we cut it, because we're going to apply our stencil on the bottom here before we put our etching cream on. So I wanted to kind of show you that so you understand what the next step is. So now that we know that, you want to get out your baking dish that you're going to be using. I want you to flip it over, and we need to kind of get an idea. We're going to measure the bottom of our pan. Now, we don't want to worry about the sloped sides on here. We want to just measure it just to make sure that as we're working with our stencil, I'm going to kind of visually look at this so that I'm looking at it from wherever your bottom of this, that it's flat before it starts to slope off. So it's probably about 13 inches by 9 inches or so. So depending upon which size pan you're using, kind of get a feel for where the flat bottom is of your dish. You can't go by the dimensions that's on the packaging for your glass because it slopes outward. And so you want to get it so that you measure just the bottom of it. Now, how do you know if your Pyrex dish can be etched on? Okay, so you cannot tell if it has a coating on it or not. I mentioned that earlier. The Pyrex dishes had 2 different processes that were made with these. So what you can do though is you can take your etching cream and you can use your little brush and just over in one little spot. I usually do it like on the round surface down here. I will use the etching cream and just make a little tiny dab, okay? Then I'm going to leave it on let me see if I can, okay. You guys can see right here where my finger is on the inside. This is where I did my little test, okay? It ends up looking like a little bit of a scratch. So I did a test with the Etch-All and I did a test with the Armor Etch to make sure that this glass was able to be etched. So I just did a dab, then I left it on for only 1 minute. All right, so I left it on for 1 minute, then I just took a damp cloth and I wiped it off. Once I wiped it off, I could tell if it actually started to etch the edge, okay? Etch the glass. If it does not, when you wipe it off, if it does not look like it etched at all, that means that your glass probably has some kind of a coating on it and you're not going to be able to use that particular thing. So before you go to all the trouble of doing all the rest of this, make sure you do a little test on your glass. So sometimes people do it up like on their handle over here. I usually just tend to pick a corner and just do a little dab here or there. And so you know that it is going to be a good project. Once you get it measured, then we're going to go over to Design Space and we're going to figure out how to make our stencil. Okay, so here we are in Design Space and we're going to come over here to our left-hand menu and select Shapes, and we're going to hit the square and bring up a square onto our mat. Now this is where we're going to put our measurements in that we measured on the bottom of our dish. So mine was 13 by 9 more or less. So I'm going to put that on here. So this is going to represent the bottom of my pan. Now, of course, in Design Space, I can only cut 11.5 by 11.5 if I'm using the regular 12 by 12 Cricut mat, right? So I can start there. So I'm going to leave this black, but I'm going to grab another square. And this one, I'm just going to change to another color so we can see it easier. All right, so for this one, I could do, 11.5 by 8. See how that looks. I know I can cut 11.5 in one direction and then 8 this way, so I can kind of start looking at that. What we're trying to do is we want to figure out how big do we want our image to be on the bottom of our glass pan. So I know I don't want my image to be quite this big, so I'm going to change it until I get this gray square about the size that I want my whole stencil to be. So this is the most important part to get this piece the way you want it. I'm going to change it to 9 by 8, not quite a square. This looks about the size that I might want it in the bottom of my pan. I'm probably going to make my height just a little bit smaller, so maybe 7.5. Playing around with this so I can just kind of give you guys an idea, because I want it to be something that I'm going to feel comfortable seeing it in the middle, basically. All right, so this size fits. So the black one is the bottom of the pan. The gray one is the size that I want to cut my stencil at. So we can just get rid of the black one. And now I have this piece, whatever size it is that you made to make your stencil. This is what's going to cut out of the vinyl. Now we need to make our stenciling part, which is what we're going to slice into this base. Now, of course, you can put whatever you want. You can make yours a monogram. You could write somebody's name in it. You could come up with a cute, fun saying that you want to use. I'm just going to do from the, and once I get it here, then I can move it up here. I'm going to go into alignment and I'm going to center it. So now I have from and the is centered across each other. And then I want to do kitchen. And I'm just using the Cricut Sans font. It's a nice clean font. Now, as I'm looking at this, the letters look a little close together. When you're going to be etching, you want to pick a font that is pretty clean, doesn't have a lot of swoops and stuff on it just because it's harder to weed that. And you want it to be able to show up really nice when you use the etching cream on the bottom of your dish. So think about something maybe a little bolder. And with this, the letters are a little close together. So I can come up here into letter spacing in my top menu here, and I can increase the letter spacing to kind of space those letters out a little bit further apart from each other. That's going to make it easier to read when we go to etch it. All right, so I'm going to put that down here. And I can do the same thing where the from is up here. I think that E is a little close, so I'm going to do the same thing. I've highlighted it, and I'm just going to add letter spacing till it looks like, you know, it's going to be a nice clean image. Now, because I have centered the from and the the, this looks a little too far apart. So then you can use line spacing. By hitting the down arrow, you can move the bottom word or sentence or whatever up by using line spacing. Okay, so that looks pretty good. And so I've got my letter space. Now I want to add O'Neill. So I'm going to go into text again, and I'm going to type in the word O'Neill. So this, okay, so we've got O'Neill here, but I want O'Neill to be a different font. Okay, so I'm going to move this up, and I want to change this to a different font. So I'm going to come over here to fonts, and I have a system font that I like to use, and I like the Lobster 2 font. Okay, so that's the font that I like. And now I can stretch this out by just grabbing the handle here, and I know I want my O'Neill to be the widest part of this, okay? And as I start kind of figuring out the spacing and what I want it to look like, I'm going to take my stencil part here and I'm just going to pull it off to the side, okay? So that looks pretty good. My letters look spaced nicely. And then I can highlight this and I can come over here to the align feature up here in the top of the panel, and I can click center horizontally. Okay, so it's done all the work for me, and it's made it so that these are centered over each other. All right, so that makes it super easy. And then the next thing you want to do is, once you have this the way you want it, then you need to decide, do you want to add any images to it? So yes, I want to add an image, and I would like to add a whisk on one side because, you know, we're in the kitchen, right? So I just did a search in Design Space for a whisk and for a spatula. Now the whisk, as you can see, is one layer. That's the only thing that shows up. You only can slice, think of it as you can only slice one layer to one layer. So think of it like a rolled out cookie dough, and then you use a cookie cutter to cut into that dough. It has to be one layer and one cookie cutter, basically. So you need, all your shapes need to be one layer to be able to do the slicing. Here is the spatula that I liked, that I picked out of Design Space, but if you look over here, it's got two layers. So I'm not going to be able to slice with this layer, so I need to come over here and ungroup it. Okay, so I can ungroup it. I'm going to get rid of one of the layers. Now here is this layer, okay? And as I'm looking at this, this one has a little hole here, and I don't really want that little hole on here because my whisk doesn't have the little hole here, and I don't want to have to mess with that when I am doing my etching. So now that I've got it down to one layer, I can come over here to my layers panel and I can do contour. And then contour comes up and I can turn off that little circle and then get out of layer, hide contour. And now I have a shape that has no hole down here. Okay, just to give you some ideas of things you can do. And then I'm going to come over here to color sync, and I want to sync up all of my objects that I'm going to be making one stencil out of, because it's easier that way. Once you get it the way you want, then you want to highlight the whole thing. We're going to go back over here to our layers panel and we're going to hit weld. Okay, so down here in the bottom you can hit weld. Okay, now when you look in your layers panel, it says weld results, and it's welded all of this together. That's what you have to do to be able to slice to make your stencil. So here is our shape that I decided was the right shape for my stencil. So this will be the vinyl. Then I'm going to take my image that I just created, and I'm going to put it on top of that vinyl. I want to make sure that I've left some edge around the side, so make sure that you've got it sized appropriately, because as we're slicing this, we are going to be adding our etching cream. Wherever you see here where it's black, that's where the etching cream is going to go. All right, so you want to make sure you've left a little bit. I usually try to leave about an inch a ½ inch to an inch around the outside edges. Once you get it the way you want it on your stencil, you're going to highlight the words. Then I use Control or Command, depending upon if I'm using a Mac or a PC. Highlight everything, and now over here in my Layers panel, it says Slice. So I'm going to hit the Slice button, and then I'm going to pull away. That's my original image, and now I'm going to weed away the part that I sliced out of my vinyl. Okay, so this has created our stencil. It's as simple as that. I'm going to turn this off just so it's not confusing it. I don't want to cut that. I only want to cut this. So I'm going to hit Make It. When it goes over to your virtual mat in Design Space, you want to hit the mirror button. See down here where it says mirror, you're going to hit mirror, and it's going to flip it for you. So it's going to cut it out in the right orientation. Now we're just going to hit continue. Depending upon which material you decided you wanted to make your stencil out of, you're going to pick that in your material setting and go ahead and cut out your vinyl. Then I'll come back and show you on camera how we weed the vinyl to make sure you make a stencil, and then we'll proceed from there. So once you cut out your vinyl, what I want you to do is flip your mat over, and we're going to remove the mat from the vinyl instead of the vinyl from the mat. So hold your vinyl down and roll your mat away, and this will help keep your vinyl from rolling up on you. I do the same thing when I take off any material off the mats. It really helps. All right, so once you have this, I want you to take a pair of scissors, and we're going to cut just around the very outside of the box that we created for our stencil. Just take a second. All right, and then you can save this part of your vinyl to use on another project. All right, once you have this done, I want you to take your weeding tool, and we're going to weed away the outside of the box that we just cut around the outside. Okay, so that's going to leave us a nice stencil area. And since we're creating a stencil, what we're doing is we're going to remove every image that we want to have etching cream on. Okay, it makes sure that if you have lettering, that you are removing the outside of the letter but leaving the centers, like on the A and the E here, you want to leave the centers. Okay, so this will go pretty quickly, depending upon what your image is. Now my image, I intentionally made it a combination of letters and a couple of images, and we're going to talk about images here in just a second. Let's get this weeded. So as we are doing this, you're thinking about the part that we're removing is the part where the etching cream is going to etch onto the bottom of our pan. So now we've got all the letters done, and now I'm going to work on the images. So when you're working with your images, you want to make sure that if there's any detail that needs to be left behind, like on the spatula here, I need to leave these little 3 marks on here so you can tell that this looks like a spatula. So here's what the weeded piece looks like. All right, I could use this on another project if I cared to save it. And then also you want to do the same thing with like if you put the whisk on or something. And what I like to do, this one has a lot of little thin lines that need to be left behind, so I'll rub my finger over the image just to kind of push those pieces down, and then I take my scraper tool, and as I start to pull these up, I'll grab the edge of those little wispy parts and hold them flat to make sure that they stay on. And you want to make sure that that's looks nice and it's where it needs to be. Okay, so once you have the weeding part done for your particular image, and then you want to have a piece of transfer tape. So I've already cut this about the size of my image, and now we're going to apply it. So once you get your transfer tape ready, this is kind of big, so I'm going to fold my transfer tape in half towards each other, and then I'm going to lay my transfer tape down, doing one side at a time and then moving it over to the other side. And then I can use my scraper tool and scrape my vinyl onto the transfer tape, and then we're going to set this to the side, and we're going to prep our base of our dish. Okay, so we're going to lay our dish down. I want you to get a lint-free cloth and some rubbing alcohol, and we're just going to clean the bottom of our pan. Okay, we want to make sure that we get it clean so that our vinyl is going to stick on here and not give us any trouble. You don't want to use a glass cleaner, because a glass cleaner typically these days has a deterrent in it for leaving fingerprints behind, and you certainly don't want a chemical that's going to prevent your vinyl from sticking the best it can. All right, so once you do this, the alcohol will just evaporate immediately, and so we've got a clean surface here. So we're going to go ahead and remove our liner, the backing from our vinyl here. You want to make sure that you leave anything behind here that needs to stay on your stencil. So those little fine lines on that whisk, I want to make sure that those stay down. Same thing on the spatula and any of my lettering. And I'm going to save this because once I take my transfer tape off, I can save it and use it on another project. Now I've got my stencil. I want to lay it on the bottom of my dish, about in the middle. I'm going to do one side down first and then slowly lay the other side down. Okay, and then you want to take your scraper tool and you really want to burnish it to make sure that your vinyl is down completely. Pay particularly attention to where you've got those little fine marks or any, image. Mainly what we want to make sure is that all of our lettering is down. Then we're going to lift up our transfer tape and pull it away from our image. Don't worry if you see a few little bubbles on here. We'll talk about that in a second. Okay, and then I can take this and put it on my sheet and reuse this. Now what I want to do is I want to make sure that any bubbles that I see on here are not going to interfere with the edges of my stencil. As long as it's not next to the letters or your image, you should be fine. So that looks good. And then what you want to do, you want to take your painter's tape. We want to go ahead and just, as an extra precaution, around the outside of our glass, because anytime the etching cream touches a surface, it's going to etch, okay? So we want to make sure that we don't have any splotches around the outside. So once you have it down like this, if you're really super cautious and you feel like you want to add another row of masking tape, feel free to do so. I don't generally need that wide of a path on mine, but if this is the first time you're doing it, you may want to add a little bit more, just so you feel a little more comfortable. You're not going to get it on some of this glass surface where you don't want the etching. Okay, once you've got your stencil on, then you need to get out your etching cream. So let's talk about my experiment so we know how long we're going to leave it on and the different types of etching cream that I tested. So I have two products that I tried, which is etching cream. Now etching cream, like I said, it removes the surface of the glass enough that it leaves a frosted look to it. And it is permanent. So anywhere you put the etching cream, it's going to etch your glass. So you need to be careful. That's why we masked our stencil off, so that it helps us keep from putting it in areas we don't want it. Now the etching cream, I'm using an Etchall etching cream. It's my preferred etching cream. I think it goes on better. It gives a better overall look to it. I found the Armor Etch to be a little splotchy. Of course, you can get either one of these at craft stores or online, and I'll link that up in the description of the video. The Etchall can also work on glass and mirrors. You can also use it on marble and slate. And if you have a ceramic plate and you want to etch away the ceramic coating, you can even use Etch All for that. Now, the Armor Etch is not supposed to be used by anyone 18 or under because it is highly caustic. The Etch All is also caustic, but it has been approved for children 12 or older to be able to use it because it's a little bit milder and it's a little easier to use. Now, I personally would probably not have children do this because it is caustic and I would hate for something to happen. So obviously we're all going to wear protective gear when we're doing this. But what I wanted to show you was which one's better, okay? Do I have a preference? If I left it on, I did the top row on my, this is just a pickle jar. The top row was using the Etch All product and the bottom row is using Armor Etch. Now it's going to be hard for y'all to see this on camera probably, but I'll walk you through what I did. So I made stencils, so I did 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and 20 minutes. Because the thing that everybody is always talking about is how long. I'm going to leave my etching cream on for 30 minutes or an hour or overnight. Your etching cream does not etch any more than what it is crystallized on the top of your glass, okay? So whether you leave it on for overnight or 40 minutes, it's not going to etch anymore. Once it's etched away the top surface of your glass, that's it, okay? So leaving it on too short of a period of time can certainly affect your etching, but leaving it on longer isn't really going to make that much change and can actually harm it because it tends to get more splotchy that way. So this is the Etch All and this is the Armor. So this was at 3 minutes. Now Armor Etch recommends 1 to 3 minutes that you leave it on, okay? Etch All recommends you leave it on for 15 minutes. So here is an Etch All 3 and this is an Armor Etch 3. The Etch All 3 looks okay. It's not as dark probably as I would like to see it. The Armor Etch at 3 minutes was okay, but it was a little splotchy. Now I applied these using the same technique, which you're going to see me apply here when we actually do our etching, where I put the product on and then smoothed it over the stencil area. So I would get a consistent look. I am not of the mind where you're going to be tapping or smearing or moving your etching cream over your stencil. I don't think it makes any difference at all. The main thing is you want to get a nice even coat across your etching cream and then leave it alone and let it do its job. So at 3 minutes, it's okay. It's a little bit of a lighter etch. At 5 minutes, looking at the Etch All and the Armor Etch, which is the bottom one, I thought that the 5 minutes with the Armor Cream worked great. It looked really good. It's very consistent. It gave me a nice etch to it. The Etch All cream looks pretty good too. Probably not quite as dark as I would want it, but Armor Etch at 5 minutes worked really good. Now at 10 minutes, they both looked good. Okay, they both were consistent. I didn't have any splotches on either one of them. They looked really good. Now the Armor Etch at 15 minutes started looking a little blotchy. I think because it was just left on longer than what the manufacturer recommends. So you want to kind of follow the guidelines of the manufacturer. Now at 15 minutes, the Etch All looks absolutely perfect. Left a nice, opaque image behind. So for the 15 minutes, great. 20 minutes for the Etch All and the Armor Etch. What I discovered was then you started getting what they call splotches or ghosting on here, and you start seeing where it's not as consistent of an etch. Now, like I said, I applied these completely the same way for all of these, and so I could tell that leaving it on for longer starts to actually harm your etching instead of improving it, because it certainly doesn't look any darker, but it started looking more splotchy. My recommendation would be for the Etch All, 10 to 15 minutes seemed to be perfect. Okay, they looked really good. The 15 minutes I thought looked slightly better than the 10 minutes, but they were close enough. The Armor Etch, I thought the 5 and the 10 minutes looked the best for the Armor Etch. Okay. So that's just kind of my experiment that I did. This is a glass pickle jar. I use the same technique, making the stencils and applying it. So 5 minutes on the Armor Etch would probably be a good thing to start with. And then I'm going to do 15 minutes for my Etch-All, which is what the manufacturer recommends. They recommend that for a particular reason. Now I wanted to show you the Armor Etch. You know what? I'm going to be safe and I'm going to put my gloves on because both of these are caustic. You do not want to burn your fingers or your hands or anything. So I'm going to put my little protective gloves on. And I make sure I've taken my rings and my watch off when I am going to do this because I don't want that interfering or poking a hole in my gloves. So now I'm going to open up my Armor Etch. Now for both of these, you want to shake the bottle before you are going to be using it. Okay, so I'm just going to shake the bottle and then you can open it up and you're going to notice that the Armor Etch is a white kind of creamy color. Okay, now I'm going to put the lid back on that one. When you get a brand new thing of Etch-All, it also will look creamy just like the Armor Etch. Okay, but as this is exposed to air, it will start to darken, and now I've used mine several times and it looks like chocolate pudding. It is still going to etch just beautifully, so don't be alarmed. It'll start looking kind of this creamy color, and as it gets more exposure to air, it will start changing from like a tan to a medium brown to this dark chocolate brown, but it's still going to work perfectly for you. Okay, it's just a chemical process that's going on when the air hits it. All right, now both of these can be reusable, so you can scrape them off of your project after you finish your etching time and put it back in the jar. What I've observed over the years, because I've done many etching projects, not just this one to show you, I've done this many times, the Armor Etch tends to get crystals in it. And that means that it's little lumps and flecks, and a lot of times when you're using that on your project, you'll end up with little splotches from it having too many crystals in it. What you can do is take a pan of water, boil a pan of water on the stove in a pot, take it off of the stove, and then set your Armor Etch bottle in it for about maybe 10 minutes or so, and then shake up your Armor Etch. And a lot of times that helps dissolve your crystals, okay? And then because you want it to be smooth and creamy. You don't want to have flecks of hard crystals in it because that will affect how your etching looks, all right? On the Etch-All, I haven't had any issues with getting crystals in it. It will get a little lumpy sometimes, but I don't worry about that. I just kind of stir the lumps in it and it makes the lumps go away. But I don't end up with crystals with this. So I feel like I get a more consistent etching quality using the Etch-All. The Armor Etch is, you know, a good product too. It does etch nicely, but I feel like it's a little bit harder to get a better etching using the Armor Etch. These are different sizes. They come in different sizes. I just happen to prefer the Etch-All, so I bought a bigger jar of it. The Armor Etch is this is kind of the smallest jar. It's 2.8 ounces and this is 16 ounces. It's really going to matter, you know, which size you want, you know, whatever you decide what you want to have access to. We're going to get our pan that we prepared our stencil on back here. Okay, got my gloves on, I've got my protective apron on over my clothing, and I am going to get out my plate and my squeegee. And like I said, it makes no difference if you are using a sponge brush or a bristle brush. So whoever's told you that in the past, it doesn't matter. I've tested it a million different ways. Doesn't matter, whatever you feel comfortable using. If you've got little tiny pieces that you may want to get into the curves a little bit more, maybe a bristle brush might work better for you. That's up to you. And then I have a little squeegee that I got with my Etch-All cream that I'm going to use to kind of spread this out. So that's what's here. And of course, because I'm so messy, I often have a paper towel next to me just for that. All right, so you want to shake up your etching cream. So whichever one you've decided you're going to use. And you just want to mix it up like that, okay? Then I prefer to pour, since I'm using this big jar, I prefer to pour a glob of it onto my plate. You can use the scraper tool or your brush. I'll do both so you guys can see. And you're just going to start applying it. And I'm going to pull it across like this. Okay? I'm not putting it directly on, patting it on my stencil. I'm just pulling it across it. It doesn't take a lot. You don't have to put a giant glob on here, but you want to make sure it is covered. Like I said, the minute it hits the glass, it starts etching. So there's no reason to go back and pounce it or smear it on there or any of those other things you see people telling you make a difference. It does not make a difference, has been my experience. So, I know mine looks like chocolate pudding, right? Make sure you've gotten all the edges of your words or your images. It's harder on camera because I don't want to lean my head over, so I just realized I didn't quite get the top of that. So you're just going to do that and put it on. Get it on your stencil. I like to get my whole stencil done, and then I'm going to set the timer on my phone for 15 minutes. Okay, that looks good. And then you can actually put any that you didn't use back in your jar. Let's go scrape it right back in there because you can keep reusing it. You never want to add water to your etching cream. That dilutes the potency of your etch. I know that I've seen people recommend that. If you get the crystals in your etching cream, please do not do that. It will make it so your etching cream basically stops working. Use my tip that I shared with you about putting it in a pan with some warm water to help dissolve the crystals. That is the best way to do it. Okay, so our 15 minutes are up, and I'm going to just scrape away the etching cream and put it back in the jar. Okay, so I like the little squeegee, helps me with that. If you don't have a little squeegee thing, then you can use the paintbrush about like this. You want to put your lid back on your jar. You are going to take this and we're going to rinse this off. Okay, I'm going to go to my kitchen sink and do it. But before you do that, let's talk about it. I have a porcelain kitchen sink. Guess what? The etching cream will etch into your porcelain sink. If you have a stainless steel sink, like I do, it doesn't matter. It's not going to harm your stainless steel sink, all right? But if you have a porcelain sink at home, you want to rinse this very carefully. Some people have put like a bath towel in the bottom of their sink and then rinse this off on top of the bath towel to protect it from going directly onto their porcelain sink. Or you could just take a pan of water, maybe like a bucket, and put water in it and then dip this in there and wash it off with your hand. You're just going to use some cool water. You're going to rinse it off till all of the etching cream has gone away, and then we're going to come back in here and I'm going to show you how we're going to remove everything and do the reveal. It's time for the reveal. Now, when I took this to the sink, I did leave my gloves on because I wanted to make sure I didn't splatter any of the etching cream on me, and I used my hand to gently brush across this as I was washing off the etching cream. Okay, so now I can take my gloves off. You can take a paper towel and get the water, most of the water off, and then you can just start removing your tape and your vinyl. Get all the tape off first, and you can use your scraper tool to help get the edge of your vinyl up. And then I tend to like to try to peel it off at an angle like this, and you'll start seeing the etching. Okay, now it will take you a few minutes to get all of this off, so just keep pulling it away like you see I'm doing here. That's exactly what it will do to you. And you'll just need to pull it off in sections. All right, so once I have the vinyl off, then I like to just take a paper towel and some of the rubbing alcohol and dampen it, and then I'm going to go back over my entire image and make sure that there's no sticky residue left behind. And now let's see the big reveal. Ta-da! All right, from the O'Neill kitchen. It was easy as that. The reason why you want to do it on the underside is because if you cook food in this, right, your food will stain your etching if you do it on the inside, okay? That's why we do the baking dishes, we do it on the bottom. Okay, I hope you will give it a try using the Etching Cream to custom design a project on your Pyrex baking dishes. You can use the same technique that I've shown you today using the Etching Cream on other objects like glasses and wine glasses and mugs and that type of thing. But instead of mirroring your image, you would make a stencil just like I showed you, but you would just not mirror it when you cut it because it would go on top of your object. Here we've had to mirror it because we wanted to read it from the back side. Now sometimes people like to do glass plates. If you're going to do a glass plate, be sure and mirror your image and put it on the back side of your plate so that you're not going to have any interference with food. So now you can put this in the dishwasher. You can wash it by hand or put it in the dishwasher, and it's never going to change the etching that you've done on this using the Etching Cream. There again, I'll link up all the different things that I use for this project so you can gather your supplies. I'll put it in the description where you see the video. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure and subscribe. You don't want to miss any future tutorials. And as always, happy crafting.